In 1889, John Joseph Krakowski was born to Adam and Julia Krakowski, in Wolleck, Austria. In 1908, at the age of 19, John Krakowski left Austria and immigrated to North America. His first landfall was St. John's, Newfoundland. From St. John's, he took a schooner to Fairfax, Nova Scotia. There, he boarded the Grand Trunk Railroad, and headed west 2,100 miles across Canada. His trip ended in Port Huron, Michigan, where he entered the United States on December 23. When he crossed the border, he declared his final destination was Cleveland, Ohio. Cities like Cleveland with ethnic neighborhoods drew new immigrants by offering them native language merchants and friendly assistance. John eventually settled on the east side of Cleveland, where he met Frances Stanowica. In 1915, John and Frances were married. The following year, John became a naturalized citizen. When John was first married, he worked at the Cleveland Hardware Company as a stockkeeper. John and Frances had 3 children: Joseph, Edmund, and Felina, better known as Phyllis. John decided to start a business and left the hardware company. The family opened a butcher shop on East 65th. It was a 2-story building and the family lived above the butcher shop. It was a family operation, and the business thrived. This story is about their son, Edmund, who was known as Edward, Ed, or Shorty. Once out of school, Ed's first job was a clerk for Hermes. Hermes is a manufacturer of air and liquid filters for aircraft and cars. In October 1940, Edward marries Eleanor Kulik. In March of 1941, Ed joins the Army. 8 months later, Pearl Harbor is attacked and the U.S. enters World War II. In December 1942, Ed's older brother Joseph also joins the Army. Joseph had a year of college and enters as a warrant officer. February 19, 1942. Ed Krakowski is transferred to the medical unit at the new Army base in Columbia, South Carolina. The base was used for advanced combat training of B-25 bomber crews. The training was dangerous. The inexperienced crews and night training took its toll. There were 41 plane crashes with many fatalities that occurred at the base. The base medical unit treated the officers and servicemen that were injured. In January 1943, Edward is promoted to first sergeant. Known in Army slang as Top Kick. 1943 is also the year Ed and Eleanor have their first child, Jerome, who is better known as Jerry. Their son Ronald was born the following year. Ed and his medical unit were featured in a newspaper article. Edward was described as cheerful and energetic. His Army career started when he was inducted at Fort Hays. From there he went for basic training at Camp Lee, Virginia. After basic training, he was sent to Hunter Field in Savannah, Georgia before being assigned to the Columbia Army Air Base. Once at Columbia, the newly formed medical department started out as a dispensary in a tent. It took several weeks before a medical officer was assigned to the medical unit. The medical unit responsibilities grew as the war waged on. The men who served with Ed understood the importance of their job, and did their best for the unfortunate who passed through their care. Ed was always trying to improve himself. He took classes in the evenings at the University of South Carolina, to improve his personal management skills. Some of the training crashes were in area lakes. Several B-25s have since been recovered and are being preserved for display at the Southern Museum of Flight, in Birmingham, Alabama. In the summer of 1945, the Columbia Army base was closed, and turned over for civil use as the Columbia Metropolitan Airport. October 1945, Edward is discharged from the Army as Master Sergeant. As a strong family man ready to return to civilian life, he turned down the rank of warrant officer to re-enlist. Ed and Eleanor remained in Columbia. He wanted to go into business, like his father. Ed and Eleanor opened a small diner in Columbia. In 1948, Ed and Eleanor had their third son, Thomas. All 3 sons, Jerome, Ronald, and Thomas, shared their father's middle name of Victor. All of Ed's sons served in the Army during the Vietnam War. Jerry was in the reserves from 1968 to 1974. Ron served as a lieutenant from 1967 to 1970. And Tom served from 1967 to 1971. Ed opened a more permanent diner. He thought of calling it Shorty's, but the area already had a Shorty's, so he called it Ed's Drive-Thru. One of the sweet treats he offered was a 21-inch banana split, featuring Bebop's ice cream. In 1949, Ed and Eleanor welcomed their 4th child, and first daughter, Marilyn. In the early 1950s, the KKK, threatened to burn Ed's drive-thru to the ground, unless he served the black customers in back, or not at all. Ed and Eleanor decided to move the family back to Ohio and settled in Bedford. In 1952, the fifth and last child, Kathleen Francis, is born in Bedford. After the move, Ed worked for Star Bakery in Cleveland. Later, Star Bakery was bought out by Huff Bakeries. The Star Bakery emblem still remains on the old Huff building. In 1956, the Krakowski family moved to Twinsburg into the former Walsh property on Route 82. Ed got a job in Cleveland with Salem Potato Chips. After moving to Twinsburg, Ed and Eleanor became friends with Al Plata. Ed and Al went to school together in Cleveland. Both Ed and Eleanor worked at the Lake Plata concession stand. Their two older sons, Jerry and Ronald, also worked at Lake Plata, doing cleanup around the lake. Their younger brother Tom often tagged along to collect pop bottles for the 2-cent deposit. In 1960, the Krakowskis decided to go back into the drive-in business. In June, the family requested rezoning their residential property from R2 to B1 business. The request was denied. Eleanor appealed, and was turned down in 1961. Finally, in April 1962, the Twinsburg Board of Appeals approved the rezoning request for construction of a drive-in on Route 82. Al Plata helped Ed and Eleanor plan the new drive-in. Besides raising 5 children, Eleanor also worked. She was a telephone operator for the construction company that built the Chrysler stamping plant, a licensed barber, a cosmetologist, and a realtor. When the new building was completed, it was called Shorty's Drive-In. Once the drive-in was in operation, Eleanor managed Shorty's during the day, and Ed would come home after his day job and manage it at night, and on weekends. Once the Krakowski children were old enough, the entire family was involved. Shorty loved the drive-in business, and the people he met. Left to right, first is Bernie Wyben from Northfield. Bernie maintained and repaired the equipment at Shorty's. Next, is Ron, Ed's middle son. Then Ed's youngest son, Tom. And on the end is Ed Krakowski. Kathy Krakowski. Roseanne of Northfield on the left, and Marilyn Krakowski on the right. On the day before Labor Day in 1972, Shorty had a heart attack. He was taken to Bedford Hospital where he passed away at the age of 52. He was survived by his wife Eleanor, his 5 children, Jerry, Ron, Tom, Marilyn, and Kathy, 2 grandchildren, and his brother Joseph, and sister Phyllis. Eleanor continued to run the drive-in without Shorty. But in 1974, Eleanor decided to sell. The new owner added batting cages and expanded the drive-in. But it just wasn't the same without Shorty and Eleanor, and popularity dropped off. Shorty's went out of business and was sold for redevelopment. Eleanor moved to Aurora. She went back to school and became a licensed practical nurse. She worked as a nurse until she retired. Ownership of the property changed hands several more times. Proposals to redevelop the property were made, but failed to get the city's approval. One proposal was a new restaurant called Chicken Cuisine. The proposal failed to get a conditional use permit from the city. The second proposal was an RV center with an 18,000 square foot building, and parking for 100 campers. The city didn't feel it was appropriate for the industrial zoning and turned it down. The third proposal was by Nick Dimitroff of Hudson, who proposed a 25,000 square foot furniture store and a 15,000 square foot warehouse. Again, the city didn't feel it fit the I-2 zoning and turned it down. In November 1999, the Ohio EPA issued a permit to the Twinsburg Fire Department to burn the former Krakowski house. The following year, both the house and drive-in properties were merged into the Walter J. Key subdivision. In 2001, the city approved the construction of an office building on the former Krakowski property. The redeveloped property became known as Vantage Point. The first building was built in 2001. In 2012, 2 more office buildings were built. Memories of Shorty's Drive-In, Ed and Eleanor, and the Krakowski family remain long after the drive-in disappeared. Eleanor and Shorty are gone. But their 5 children and grandchildren carry the Krakowski work ethic into the future.